Thank you for staying right here with your community station on 93.6 FM. So we may be wrapping up the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, but we do know that this scourge doesn't just end with the 16 days or this campaign, but this is where our responsibility as teachers, as educators, as parents, as friends, as neighbors, it continues as we also raise awareness, as we educate our young people, as we support our survivors and believe them as well, protect them, as we want to free our homes, our workplaces, our communities from violence. So it's actually everybody's duty. And once again, we welcome author Lizanne as we've been journeying through a survivor story from a book, Loved by Grace, toward a graceful purpose. So Lizanne, it's a warm welcome to you. Thanks so much for your time once again.
Good day, Venora. Thank you for the opportunity of sharing this time with you, and it's great to be back.
So Lizanne's not alone today. She's also joined by one of her founding team members of STEPS, taking safe steps beyond abuse with victims of abuse and their support systems. Lizanne, please introduce your special guest today.
Venora and listeners, today we have Reverend Vernon Loker with us. He is a pastor with Reach SA, as well as upcoming pastor of St. Olaf Church. He's also a volunteer for SADAG, that stands for South African Depression and Anxiety Group. And yes, he's one of STEP's vital founding members. Vernon, we're covering a topic today that I myself need help on, so I'm so grateful to you for being here and sharing your knowledge from your personal experience as well as a biblical knowledge.
Lizanne, thanks for having me. It's a real joy and privilege to be here. And Venora, good to meet you as well. Thank you for having me in your studio.
It's a warm welcome to you, Pastor Loker. So Lizanne, we now actually ending off our series in this interview on GBV. I must say it's really courageous of you, just writing this book, just coming through what you've gone through, and just even wanting that help, wanting to even share and to help others as a survivor activist yourself. So we truly honor your bravery. And there is a chapter in the book where you also write about being brave on page 105. If you can just maybe take us through that.
Yes, Venora, and it's actually a quote that I've borrowed from Liza Terkhurst. She's an American pastor, and I'd love to read it for you because this is exactly how I felt and how I know that many individuals out there also feel. Being brave is not always something you feel. It's something you do. You do it in the face of fear and unknown outcomes and risks you really don't want to take. You do it when your enemy is staring you down with taunting statements that take defeat. You do it not to prove there's something great inside of you. You do brave, because if you don't, something will die inside of you. You do brave things because it's time to rise up and speak up and let truth find its freedom with your voice. The hurt you've had to overcome is hard, really hard. What happened was wrong. Acknowledge it, speak it, cry over it, but do not die over it. You've been hurt, but you don't have to live hurt. You do brave things because you are a woman who can kneel humbly and who can rise intentionally. You will find good people, and good people will find you. You'll do brave until you become brave. You will know what it's like to love people again. You'll find your laughter, and you'll know deep in your bones that you will not waste all that you've learnt. Those split tears, every one of them, was you letting go of the pain to make room for possibility. Your life is not a tragedy. It's a testimony. Don't wait until you feel brave. Go be brave. And if your hands are shaking, let it only be because you're pointing at the devil who picked on the wrong girl this time. And as I've said, that quote is from Liza Terkust.
So a survivor story doesn't just end there with coming out of a destructive relationship and your life just dying with it. But actually, you've come out of it a much more free and a much more experienced human being, because now you understand true freedom. You're healing still, but you know more about yourself. You know more about others in your relationships. You also know your triggers, your emotions. It's all in the book. So life can still be hopeful as you embrace God's will for your life, as you embrace His healing power, as you also learn to love again, to be loved. So you have a few questions for Pastor Loker.
Pastor Loker, if I can ask you, in what circumstances is it wise and godly to walk away from an abusive relationship?
Lizanne, that really is a profound and deep question, and I'd like to break it down, if I may. I believe that gender-based violence and violence to the extent that we are witnessing in society today is an escalation of anger and bitterness and resentment. So to begin with, when one senses that you're finding yourself in a volatile or an overly emotional situation, the wise thing to do is to walk away from that to begin with. So you leave the room, or you go away for a weekend, or you just leave that situation behind you. It may seem weak and it may seem ungodly, but I believe that that is a step in stemming the violence that we are seeing today, in gender-based violence in particular. And I think if one has then experienced a series of those steps which have not allowed for the situation to return to some kind of normality. So if you've experienced violence on an ongoing basis, in spite of walking away, in spite of attempting reconciliation, in spite of not spending excessive amount of time in this violent situation, I think then one reaches a place where you make a decision. And invariably the decision will be to leave, because I think it's the right thing to do. Your presence or your staying could simply just reignite violence and more violence and more violence. One doesn't strike another human being the first time off. It always begins with aggression, and it begins probably with filthy language and so on. So when one has had more than a fair share of that, which is relative to the situation of the couple, I think then one needs to consider walking away, as you put it.
And when the abuse isn't physical, it's emotional and it's psychological, it's much harder to pick up. If I can ask for a little bit of guidance biblically, what does the Bible say about, like in my own situation, I stayed because I truly honored the godly covenant commitment of marriage.
Right.
But I should have left. How biblically can we know to leave in time? Right.
Lizanne, having read your book, that once again a profound and deep question. And I think if you study the life of Jesus, if you read the Gospels very, very carefully, you will notice that Jesus never allowed himself to be undermined or to be belittled or to be abused in any way. Obviously, the crucifixion was an aspect of his salvation work, but Jesus didn't tolerate being treated poorly throughout his life. And I think we need to pick up on that principle. It's not right to subject oneself to humiliation, to being undermined, and very often that takes place in a public setting, which is even more humiliating, and it's even more difficult to deal with because the perpetrator will say, but I was only joking, or you're taking matters too seriously or you're too sensitive. Those two are undermining statements. And I think one's got to be very aware of psychological and emotional manipulation in the subtlety that it presents itself. Now, you may not address it publicly or orally at the time, but you'll need to, in a very real way, just bank it in the back of your mind, that is abusive, and I'm not going to allow myself to be exposed to that kind of abuse.
So once again, knowing what abuse is crucial in order to avoid it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think very often that's an overlooked aspect of abuse. And some of the pointers are the perpetrator will always want to have the last word, or they will always belittle you, or they will always put you down, and you're just not good enough. And that has a tremendous undermining effect on an individual, on a person. And so one needs to know that and be equipped to deal with coping with that kind of manipulation and psychological and emotional abuse.
You've answered my next question to some extent, but perhaps something else springs to mind. Why, in your view, do so many marriages end up as minded?
Lizanne, once again, a very deep question, and I've got to say that having read your book and just reflected on my ministry, your story is one that I've heard a number of times. Some of the details would be different, but it's a common story. It's a story that does run throughout. And I think it begins with being undermined and being subtly and emotionally abused to the extent where you start believing the lie. And your confidence is absolutely eroded and corroded. So you start functioning as a shell of a human being because you have been so psychologically and emotionally abused that you convince yourself that this is the best that you can do, that you need to accept this as your lot in life, and that you need to, phrase that I really don't like, I almost despise it, is soak it up or move on. All of those features, and possibly more, are built into marriages that end up such as yours, where one spouse will completely and utterly destroy the other. And I would like to just point out here that very often it's not only the woman that suffers that kind of abuse. Men are also at the receiving end of emotional and psychological and sometimes physical abuse, but mainly it's emotional and psychological. And they too start doubting themselves, start believing the lie. And I suspect that's probably not the only reason, or maybe the only few reasons, but put together that would constitute a lot of why so many marriages do end up utterly destroyed.